What is up, my friends? We are here, the penultimate finale of our Seeing Through Gebser series. I want to pat you guys on the back for sticking it out. We are so close. We have one more video after this, and then we're done. We'll do a criticism video after that, but that's not really, that's kind of separate. So yeah, second to last video. You know, it's funny. My mom and I, we watched Better Call Saul together, the last season at least, when it was airing on TV. And I remember before the second to last episode, I was sitting and I said, the penultimate finale. And my mom just kind of registered it, and we started watching the show. Now, if you watch the show, you realize the second of last episode, I don't think there's anything like crazy going on. I think it's kind of set up for the final. So I remember after the episode, my mom was like, what was so great about that? And I was like, what do you mean? I mean, it was a good episode, but what are you talking about? So she looked up penultimate. She thought penultimate meant ultimate, like super ultimate, as if this was going to be like the fireworks episode. So she was a little disappointed at the end when no one's head was blown off. But yes, we're in the second of last video in this series, and I'm very excited, almost a little sad too. I'm going to miss doing this series, but the good news is, if you guys want, we could do a series of other books, so that could be fun. Okay, so let's get into it. This is the twofold task, starting with Gebser. What is done today in the name of art is impotence and untruth. This includes music after Wagner, as well as painting after Manet, Cézanne, Leibel, and Menzel. Where do we find the great personages who could justify the claim that there is an art of inescapable, fated necessity? Let us seek the self-evident and requisite task awaiting such art." Unquote. That was a quote, excuse me. This is Gebser now. These sentences were written in 1917 by Oswald Spengler and remain unchanged in the second edition of 1922. As his remarks in other contexts show, they do not pertain only to the arts. Today, a generation later, we no longer need to seek the great quote-unquote personages, how dated this term sounds. Those who, each in his own area, have begun to change our world conception into a new world perception have been allowed to speak in the preceding chapters. Nor do we need to seek any longer new tasks. So Gebser is trying to position himself, to a certain extent at least, in opposition to Spengler. He's saying, this little quote about all art is impotence and untruth, no, that's not necessarily it. You misunderstand what contemporary or modernist painting is, so that's why you view it. As the preceding 300 pages has shown that many new, integral, unique, irrational thinkers are out doing their thing. This idea that we're surrounded by cultural impotence, I mean, to a certain extent it is true because our culture sucks and all art sucks right now, at least mainstream art. But it doesn't have to be that way. We just have to let those with voices sing. How do we do that? First, recognize that they have voices. Nor do we need to seek any longer new tasks. The quote-unquote self-evident and requisite task awaiting us is now clear. It is unmistakable, the obvious consequence of all the temporic efforts and inceptions of the last 5 generations. It is a necessary task, since without it, we would give ourselves up rather than achieving what has been given us to do. So the twofold task is recognize and integrate the other structures, so mainly the magic and the mythical mainly, but also the mental, now that we've rendered that transparent. And the other fold is, of course, integrating time. That's the twofold task. As John David Ebert makes the point he makes when talking about Gebser, where Spengler sees a decline, Gebser sees a transition. So Gebser would say Spengler's life cycle civilization is correct, so long as you don't make the safe consciousness structure transition. So long, in this case, as you are abandoned on the, what does he call it? You arrived on the shores of time, or whatever. I'm trying to be poetic. So long as you don't meet the new standards of the new structure, yeah, you will fail. So that's a little difference between Spengler and Gebser. Spengler says that each civilization has about 1,000-year life cycle. They exist to actualize some metaphysical telos, and then they kind of die out. Gebser's saying, yeah, maybe so, but so long as they transition, they're going to be fine. And I think China probably would be a good example of that. I imagine the reason China's been around so long is for whatever reason they've been able to adjust. That's just speculation, though. Since Spengler did not discern a task either for the arts or for the other areas of our lives, he wrote off the West. Nevertheless, although we are in a similar, if not more catastrophic post-war situation than Spengler, It has befallen our generation to perceive and resolve the task entrusted to us. So this is a very interesting parallel here. Spengler's great work was written or published after the post-catastrophic state of World War I. And then Gebser's magnum opus was published after World War II. So as awful as those wars were, in the nature of the polarity of good and evil, well, there will be some good evil, or some good that comes out of it. Then, as now, our situation is fraught with danger since we are confronted by a twofold task. To the extent that the task is compelling, the danger is also increased. If we fail to fulfill the task, we abandon ourselves. Throughout the preceding discussion, we have constantly indicated the possibility of this surrender. The aperspectival world is not yet consolidated, and everything is still in flux. Above all, the modern addiction to novelty, ultramodernism, the rejection of heritage, of tradition in the best sense of the word, do not belong to it. So, obviously, tradition, you don't have to do this binary, either 100% for or 100% against. Just take it as it is. On the contrary, the first part of our study should have demonstrated that the insightful recognition of our foundations, which modernists wish to discard absolutely, are of decisive importance. It will depend on us whether the problem of aperspectival time is resolved successfully, or whether it is misunderstood in terms of the deficient rationalistic mentality. A further rationalization of time would lead to a general atomization, whereas the achronization of time would transcend the contemporary situation toward constitution and consolidation of the efficient new consciousness structure. If we surrender to the destructive, deficient powers, if we ascribe to rationality a character of exclusive validity, if we continue to measure time with inappropriate measure, then we shall have indulged in mismeasurement, a hubris, which is not only inadequate, but runs counter to the task. If we are able to assist in the breakthrough of originary power, which is erupting to manifestation, instead of assisting the powers of unbounded machination, we can escape destruction. Since the dangers of self-destruction are great, let us briefly summarize them. So now we're going to do a very brief, very, very brief summary of, I guess, deficient rationalism and deficient other structures in each subject. It's going to be very brief. Unfortunately, now, of course, the deficient aspect of integral consciousness is dissolution, and we are going to see that dissolution take place. I'll use a language as an example, but we'll see. In mathematics, there is a danger of atomization and deficient quantification unless it can be kept from collapse into mere logistics and statistics. The geometrical physical treatment of time in physics has led to an atomization that can be restrained only if the qualitative elements of Planck's conception can be brought to awareness and if the achronic structure of matter, implicitly formulated by Heisenberg, is taken to heart. The exclusion of the spiritual dimension from the inquiry into the life processes will lead biology to the atomization of humanity. The robot-like propagation of artificial insemination as a mechanical exaggeration of vitalism is a good example of this, unless insights such as those of Adolf Portman are respected. If the efforts of quote-unquote molecular biology are successful and applicable to quote-unquote controlled genetic processes, almost a certain possibility of the 1970s, and it absolutely, obviously is a possibility and reality now, humanity will be endangered in such a way that the inconceivable and catastrophic consequences of an unleashed nuclear power, and it is horrible just to mention this, would appear almost harmless by comparison. So Gebser is saying that unless rationalism really chills, and we continue with this artificial insemination and this mechanical exaggeration of vitalism, he's saying the potential negative impacts of that are going to make nuclear bombs look like child's play. So, not great. Little worrying. In psychology, the dangers lie in psychic inflation and its deformation into psychism. Yep, and the psychic obsession that threatens to atomize the soul and drown man in the artificially stimulated whirlpool of hyper-amplified quote-unquote archetypes and complexes, especially when psychology forgets or even psychologists the spiritual dimension, and in its application to the office or factory for the purpose of greater quote-unquote output. So the psyche has become atomized. There is no way that the divisions in the psyche from rationalism or whatever it is have become so great and so pronounced that they have torn asunder the psyche, and there's no healthy avenue to integrate it or make it whole again. On top of that, the psyche has a way of psychologizing away spirit, so we can't have the benefits of spiritual energies enhancing us. On top of that, we have actually, we'll skip it. Okay. In philosophy, the danger lies in non-commitment. Mere concepts, categories, analyses, and systems no longer lead to an intensified search for truth, but rather to a complete disillusion and, ultimately, atomization of thought. Hello, postmodernism. No longer are we searching for truth. We are rejecting the premise of truth outright in postmodernism. We are doing mere concepts, categories, analyses, and systems that do not care about uncovering truth. They only exist for power purposes. Postmodernists will explicitly tell you this. That is their philosophy. So unfortunately, rationalism combined with the non-conscious integration of the integral structure have combined to dissolve philosophy, and it has destroyed things, and that is obviously not good. There's someone, I can't remember who said it, but they said too many people come out of a philosophy degree thinking that there is no truth, rather than, the truth exists, but it might be a little more complicated than people think. Philosophy is destroyed. I mean, it gets to a point where I've heard philosophy professors on YouTube or whoever, they'll just tell you, like, yeah, philosophy's dead. It's completely dead. Also, go sign up for philosophy. It's like, no, why would I sign up for this dead? Just weird. So yeah, in an indirect way, Gebser kind of predicted postmodernism, but we already kind of knew that. In an indirect way, Gebser predicted the rise of social justice. So, in jurisprudence, the prevalence of quote-unquote use value and the privileges of anonymous sectors, hello bureaucrats, hello programs, trusts as well as governments, together with a refusal to recognize the basis and relationship between property and work, may lead to a decline of a qualitative justification for life, thereby destroying the structure of human relationships. So jurisprudence leading to awfulness. I don't think Gebser quite foresaw how politically corrupted jurisprudence would get. Like, he's talking about use value. I mean, that's nice, but jurisprudence nowadays is more identity focused. So sociology, whether political, economic, or cultural, is threatened by an ultimate loss of quality in that the individual is threatened by a resubmersion into the anonymous mass and consequent atomization. We see this all the time. The atomization, both sides criticize this, and they're right to do that. The left criticizes atomization, and the right criticizes atomization. They are both correct in doing that. The problem is the individual is threatened by a resubmersion into the anonymous mass. Yes, that is the far left and the far right. Now, of course, this also applies to a certain extent to the moderate left and the moderate right. Just because you're moderate doesn't mean you never display any mass psychology phenomena. That's silly. That's delusional. But generally speaking, when you have the extreme parties, yeah, they all lose their individuality. And you saw this with things like Antifa. I mean, back in the day, you saw this with the KKK, right? There's a reason why they wore masks. They did not want the individual. They wanted to submerge themselves in the mass. They did not want to be individually pointed out and say, you, my friend, have moral responsibility as an individual. Justin, you should not be doing this. Remember, in the incredibly, profoundly overrated book To Kill a Mockingbird, what is Scout, I think it is? She points out that guy. She mentions his name and says, hey, you under the mask, that's you. And what does he do? He goes, oh, I got picked out. There you go. You identify the individual. Among the dual sciences, parapsychology is exposed to spiritualistic occultism, and occultism hoping to find a spirituality of the quote-unquote beyond, although it usually finds only traces of materialistic spiritualism, that is, products of psychic decomposition. So essentially, you're just regressing to the magic structure and doing all this weird magical taboo. That's fine. You're not really getting into spirit. And two, what do we know about this? The whole point of Gebser's spiritual belief is that the spirit is not quote-unquote beyond. That's a spatial understanding. That's mental structure. Mental structure can't account for spirit. So the spirit is here. It is the transcendent is immanent. So when the parapsychologists try to go beyond, you're already off to the wrong start. The progressive accentuation of the metric motoric elements of music would eventually lead to a complete divesting of meaning and an atomization of tones. As Frank Lloyd Wright has pointed out, the continuous construction of skyscrapers and prefabricated houses will lead to a catastrophe in architecture. The frenzied quantification, is tantamount to a barricading of man, a reduction of life to the anthill and social atomization instead of freedom. Yes, hello Deleuze, by the way. So even architecturally, not only are we seeing more skyscrapers in a quantitative sense, but think about skyscrapers. What's the whole point about them? Is that they're bigger, they're larger in a quantitative sense. They have more, in a quantitative sense, stories. So as more skyscrapers are constructed, and as they get taller and taller and taller, we, in relation to it, and which we will inevitably compare ourselves to because they're just going to surround us the whole time, we will feel small, we will feel like the individual, the atomized ant, and here comes Deleuze's postmodern critique of, I guess, institutions. So on the whole, I think it's pretty good. The atomization has partially come true in painting. The misplaced use of the psychic aspects of time, the unrestrained hurling of mostly pathological and inflated psychic contents onto canvas, thank you, that's surrealism. The disruption and explosion of spatio-corporeal forms without the requisite experience of spatial restructuration are exemplary of this, even in some works of Picasso. This is an important line. The disruption and explosion of spatio-corporeal forms without the requisite experience of spatial reconstruction. This is magical thinking. If we view something, this happens in politics all the time. This happens on the left, I would argue mostly, but it also happens on the right. We go out into the world, we acknowledge that something is not ideal or perfect, we say that's bad, we deconstruct it, and then we don't enact that preceding reconstruction. It is magical thinking. If we destroy this, something will magically appear in its place that is better. If we simply will it, we will pre-rationally and magically unify willing intention with effect. It is nonsense. You need to start calling people out on this. It is childish, it is petulant, and it is not the sign of an educated or intelligent man. It's the sign of the opposite. Don't think that just because people are criticizing something, that those critiques are high quality. They're not. A lot of them are dog shit. In poetry, and indeed in language in all forms, including everyday usage, the threat of dissolution is imminent. The misunderstood virulence of the temporal component, the quote-unquote Russian race against time, results in the quote hounding to death unquote of language. The mania for acronyms, the random use of words, the massive daily publications are all indications of the threat of atomization to language. So this is a good little microcosm that will help explain the other ones we just mentioned. So take language. Now, as an integral thinker, we know that one signifier can signify multiple signifieds. So if you have one word, it can have multiple meanings simultaneously. So if you say something like, I want you to come work my package, you tell me how you interpreted that. Because if I'm in The Wire, if I'm in Baltimore and I say, I want you to work my package, what that means is I'm going to front you some drugs and you can go sell it. But if I go to a gay bar, right, and if I say, hey, I want to work my package, that's going to be interpreted differently. And let's just say Enrique might try to find me after I leave. So there's a threat of disillusion here because the rational, perspectival way of doing things, each signifier is ascribed one signified that is spatially and statically set, making it quote-unquote objective, and that's that. So this word means that and nothing else. But of course we know that that's not how humans operate, that's not how humans exist. People use double entendres and, they shift with significance. That's what makes wordplay and rap so fun. So I'm fine with this idea that we can have multiple layers of causality or layers of significance existing simultaneously. That's all in alignment with integral consciousness. Great. The problem is, assuming everyone's working in good faith and everyone's being honest, this isn't much of an issue. And as a matter of fact, it opens up a domain of truth, language, space, time, whatever you want to call it, and can really aid us in our actions to improve the qualitative scale of the individual and the collective. Great, right? But when people redefine words and they have private languages and then they don't explain what the redefinition is and then they use words as magic spells, like for example, like racist. Like racist has been, it had a particular meaning. But now, racist has a new meaning. And they'll just tell you this. So they'll say, well, the old definition, that's not true. The new one is prejudice plus power equals racism. We can have that discussion if you think that's a good thing or a bad thing. The problem is, if one side is not willing to discuss the new definitions of the new signifier, you get a dissolution in language. So now we have two people talking past each other. So one guy would say, I don't understand how I'm being racist when I'm firing a guy for stealing $5,000 from me. And they would say, well, you are being racist because you have the power over him, plus you are privileged, and you're doing something that would harm him. So therefore, so instead of these two people just kind of talking it out and being like, hold on, let's just be really clear what you mean by that word, and then we can get into it. Instead, people are using words as magical spells, which means they become dissolved. And it's really kind of sad, actually, because there are a lot of people on the right who are just openly identifying as racist because you've diminished the potency of that word. And that happens to a lot of things, too, and it's really frustrating. Fascist is one of them. Hell, the right did it to socialists. You know, anytime the left wanted to do a school lunch program, oh, you're a socialist, you're a socialist. Okay, well, socialists originally meant an historical and economic movement. It originally meant a planned economy in its entirety rather than just a singular lunch program. If you want to say a lunch program is a planned little mini economy, fine. But there's obviously a qualitative and quantitative distinction between these two. So if you want to say socialism, okay, but which one are you talking about? So the word gets dissolved. Take that principle as a microcosm and apply it to other areas. And then, of course, what Gebser just reminded us in the domain of language, time itself is fueling this dissolution because we feel a sense of urgency, emphasis on the time, we impose a sense of urgency on ourselves to get as many words out, to speak as quickly as possible, as evident in acronyms. So we're just talking just to talk. What does he call it? Hounding to death language, words lose all their meaning. They're no longer things that bring origin to the present. They're just chatter, nothing. Okay. In everyday life, few are aware that the motorization, mechanization, and technologization impose quantitative conditions on man that lead to an immeasurable loss of freedom. Machines, film, press, radio lead not only to mediocrity and a dependency relationship, but also to an increasing de-individuation and atomization of the individual. The extent of these dangers is exemplified by present-day sports. What was once play has become a frenzy of record-setting. The attendant devotion of the individual, submerging himself in the mass of spectators, to a worthless phenomenon is a symptom of the contemporary transitional era. It's like I wrote in my notes here, someone was picked last in gym class. How embarrassing. Guys, I know I assume most of you watching this are like academic and intellectually inclined. Please stop doing this. I hope you know, as someone who, don't get me wrong, I was never going to be a professional or anything like that, but as someone who played sports my whole life growing up, it's so self-evidently ridiculous when you guys say, oh, sports is stupid, it's worthless. You got picked last in gym class and it made you feel bad about it. You're not as good as those idiot 70 IQ, whatever, rubes that you like to look down on, and they're naturally better than you at something, and it makes you feel bad. Sports is an amazing phenomenon, not only for its psychological, individual, and collective benefits that it offers. Maybe I'll do a video on it one day, excuse me. But also because you come with me to a Manchester City game, I will explain integral consciousness by the end of that game. That game's 90 minutes, add 15 minutes for halftime. 105 minutes, I will explain integral consciousness, and I will appeal to reality. You'll get the quantum logic moment-to-moment changes. That happens all the time. Sometimes the fans are super pissed because the team they want to win is not. They are angry, and they're going to throw things on the field. Then, out of nothing, the last goal comes. Boom. On a psychological level, everything is boom. I can explain time as a quality. I can explain suddenness. I can explain space-time. I can explain everything with sports. It's ridiculous that he would say something like that. And it's also, what are you saying? Like, you tell me you kicked a ball around, Gebser. You tell me you threw a ball into a net. You throw a football around, Gebser. I'd like to see that. I think you would break your wrist even trying. Don't tell me about sports when you never played it. You're going to talk to me about Heidegger and the pre-theoretical mode of being and the theoretical mode of being, and you expect me to take you seriously when you denounce sports as an entirety, as a worthless phenomenon on a purely theoretical understanding of it. On sports, by the way, which is almost entirely pre-theoretical. Obviously, you can do your little battle plans and your strategies. I got that. But when you're actually playing the game, you're not doing high philosophy. You're only invoking rationality to do short-term problem solving. It's just laughable that he would say something like this. It's just embarrassing. It's just I think it legitimately is like an intellectual shortcoming of his, where he does let his personal hang-ups just kind of affect. Like, it's so frustrating, and it's so funny too. You want to say submerging himself in the mass of spectators. How is that any different than the ancient Gaelic plays? How is that any different from some ancient Greek tragedy? I don't get it. It's just ridiculous. I've been wanting to rant about that for so long. The first time I read this, I just remember thinking, man, when I get to this in the second, I'm going to unload on this dude. That's just absolutely ridiculous. Look, if you're not good at sports, fine, but don't give me this theoretical crap about why it's worthless. Okay, if you can't get in the club, don't hate from the outside. No one cares. All right. The addiction to speed reveals the deep anxiety in the face of time. Each new record is a further step toward the quote-unquote killing of time and thus of life. So records, he does kind of have a point here. When you're setting records, take Usain Bolt. What are you trying to do? You're trying to conquer time in a measurable sense. Not necessarily a bad thing, but it does signal a time anxiety where you're only employing time in the measured sense and you keep dividing it so it keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And when that happens, you have no time to do anything. Because remember, it's space-time. The procedural unfolding of given actions take a certain time, and if you keep dividing it and making it smaller and smaller and smaller and filling up your time with smaller actions, you're not going to get anything done. The preoccupation with records is a clear sign of the predominant role of time. Even the mass psyche is enslaved by time. It attempts to surpass and free itself from time in a negative way without realizing that each new record brings us closer to the death of time instead of leading to freedom from it. It's kind of true. The addiction to overcoming time negatively is everywhere evident. The previous thresholds of time are surpassed everywhere, not only via the radio, but through supersonic aircraft. Or, another extreme example, by medical attempts to extend human longevity. Precisely these exertions, fleeing into quantification, are a temporal flight born on the time anxiety which dominates our daily lives. So, interesting idea here, that all this idea of extending the lifespan could be a form of time anxiety. Now, that's, I think, is going to be... You'd have to argue that, right? Because I think Gebser would approach it from a spiritual level. But it is interesting to think about, if nothing else. I mean, it... Because I could see someone saying that's not time anxiety, that's time freedom, because we want to live on this earth and fulfill our spiritual duties and then go. But I could also see Gebser saying, well, the whole point is that you're here for a certain time spiritually, and then you cycle back up, and then you do your thing. So I kind of get both sides. Skip ahead a little bit. Since the pronouncement of God's death, there has been a danger of man's death. From the day when the materialized powers began their struggle with the newly emerging potency, from the day when such powers began to hunt time to death, the Mephistophelian of Faust has assumed dominance. The divine is no longer perceived by man, and of course, if you don't know, Mephistopheles is the devil in Faust. At best, man reluctantly rationalizes it and obstructs the perception of origin as it endeavors to transform itself into time freedom. So we rationalize away origin and all of its spiritual plentitude, and maybe try to turn it into time freedom, but even then, it's just quantifiable time. The head of Zeus, which once gave birth to Athena, the well-aimed thought, fell to the guillotine when thought began to usurp the spirit. The gods and the conceptualized paternal god were beheaded. On this place of judgment and scaffold, the opposing principle is celebrating its heinous surfacing, where the symbol of luminous life powers, the Sun King, is dethroned and decapitated, where the Roi Soleil, the sun, has set, emerged the shadowless Schlemiels. So he's saying is, we've got a problem ever since we cut off God's head, because now we don't have the spiritual energies, we don't have the cultural glue, we don't have all this great stuff. It's also going to be very difficult to try to glue the head back together because no one's going to take it seriously anymore. You can't glue the head that was just beheaded and say, look, this is an indestructible head. We all know it's not. No man steps in the same river twice, right? The light of that greater invisible sun, perhaps it is, quote-unquote, the whole of whose light our sun is a mere reflection, was not perceived. The break with the mental did not render the whole transparent. This capability is only now beginning to gain ground. Instead, the counter-principle of the decapitated and dethroned came to the forefront of power. Mankind's journey to hell began. Faust does not solve the Mephistophelian problem. Mephisto disappears a quote-unquote diabolus ex machina. And the result is James Hogg's defense of the satanic. In his great poem, Mallarmé himself wrestles with the satanic demonic principle and includes it as the fourth principle in his major poem. So essentially what he's saying is, since rationalism started to really take control, since it really had our throats, all of a sudden we start seeing, as in the case of James Hogg, defense of the satanic. And Mallarmé starts to introduce a satanic demonic principle as the fourth principle in his major poems. And, like the Gnostics and alchemists, he anticipates the quaternity theory, which was also postulated by Carl Jung in his psychology with the inclusion of Satan. So the triangle has been turned into a quadrant, but unfortunately, that fourth point is demonic. So, not good. It is the same demonic principle once known as the diabolus in musica, the forbidden harmony of the tritone now audible in the new music. The first movement of Bela Bartok's Quartet No. 5 is similar to a medieval witch dance and deliberately exploits this tritone. So that's good. So old satanic instruments that were used to invoke the devil are now being used in contemporary music. Great, guys. Is Paul Valéry's Mon Faust, by contrast, a supersession of this principle? His Faust chides Mephisto that whatever he had wished and willed for man has been achieved since Goethe's time by man himself, leaving Mephisto no power over him. Did Valéry foresee the end of man's descent into hell? Does the insight into Mephisto's powerlessness restore to mankind the strength it's need today more than ever? So Mephisto, of course, a rationally induced or rationalism-induced satanic figure that has no power. It's been rendered transparent, as it said. His Faust chides Mephisto that whatever he had wished and willed for man has been achieved since Goethe's time by man himself. So whatever I wanted, I've achieved. I have nothing else to give. You have nothing else to give me, so therefore you have no power. I have no reason to take the deal with the devil because I've already taken it and I've already gotten it, and I'm unsatisfied with its results. So now that I know that, I don't need to go back to you because everything that you could have offered me, you've already done, and I've got it, and it's unsatisfying. Same thing with rationalism. Everything that we could have done with you, you've already offered it to us, and we don't like it. We want something else. The exhaustion of a consciousness structure has always manifested itself in an emptying of all values, with a consistent change of efficient qualitative to deficient quantitative values. By the way, I'm going to write a Substack article on this one sentence. That's obviously what's happening now. All of our foundations, be it ethical, be it moral, well, I guess the same, political, social, even interpersonal, all these foundations have completely been destroyed. Our typical virtues that we used to value so dearly, the small town virtues, they now have been denounced as racist. Only dumb, conservative, two-teethed, buck-tooth-having hicks follow the small-town conservative values. You're not allowed to follow the Christian values anymore because they hate gay people and they're satanic and they're actually evil. You're not even allowed to follow any other Western American set of values, maybe the ones implied in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights, because that's postmodern power knowledge games and that's designed to keep down minorities. So all of our values have been completely destroyed. They've been emptied. All of our values, the values of free speech, the Second Amendment, all those values completely emptied. There's a sizable amount of people in this country, it's mostly left, but there's also a right-wing faction growing, thinks that they're evil and essentially that they're tools of immoral power, essentially. It's absurd. I mean, these are values that the entire country is willing to die for and to kill for, and yet they've been completely emptied. They've been completely emptied, all of it. The traditional way of understanding media, completely emptied. That's been derided as racist. The traditional understanding of business, that's been emptied. That's been derided as racist. So that is what is happening, and not good, not good, not good. And you can also see a right-wing response to that too, where if the left wing goes far, now we get the right-wing response. So now your values will get emptied because they're not Christian. So there's like a resurgence of Christianity. Not good. I'm going to write a Substack article about it. It is as if life and spirit withdrew from those who are not co-participants in the particular new mutation. As myth overdetermined and replaced magic, the effective strength of the magical spell changed into mere bewitchment. Is important. And finally, into empty quantitative rituals. So when the mythical structure and its efficient powers emerged, all that magical stuff, all the potency there was completely diminished. And if they were able to actually magically do things, which Gebser does not dismiss out of hand because it doesn't make sense to rational thought, that is gone. And now the new glasses have come on and we see them for what they are. They are mere bewitchment. These guys are absolute morons. That's what it is. The Tibetan prayer wheel furnishes a good example. When mind overdetermined and replaced myth, the psychic chaos became evident in the innumerable monsters and demons of not only Indian but other Far Eastern temples, as well in the fragmentation of Greek myth described by Karl Karenyi. Now remember, what did Aristotle say? I'm going to paraphrase, but myth is just something the elites create to control people. I mean, that's an awful paraphrasing, but that's what he said. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It's the way that, as the mythical conscious structure has made clear, it is the way being was disclosed. It has got nothing to do with, with any sort of rational thing. Now, why would he say, with the innumerable monsters and demons? Now remember, in mythical consciousness, myth only arises after identifying correspondences between cyclical movements in the external world and cyclical movements of the internal soul. So you would say something like the soul cycles through pain and glory, or death and life, in the same way that the sky cycles through night and day, something like that. Now that's a low quality example, but you can obviously raise that. So if there are a lot of myths, that means there are a lot of correspondences to their soul, which he calls it the psyche. Now, the amount of innumerable myths means that things have gone too much. The soul has gone way out of bounds. It's like a ocean tide that just cannot be controlled, and you have to advance. You have to adapt to the efficient aspects of the mental structure. The problem is that will in turn be emptied. Now myths are just little stories of irrational morons that don't mean anything. Absolute nonsense. Today, while the integral is over-determining and dissolving the mental rational consciousness, the mental capacity of thought is being mechanized by the robots of calculation, computers, and this is being emptied and quantified. So, same thing. Now that we have integral consciousness, well, what does the mental structure give us? The ability to think, to cognitively think, and our sort of cognitive sovereignty. In the same way that the structures that we just talked about emptied out the preceding structures, now we hear the internet is emptying out the mental structure because we are outsourcing our mental faculties to the internet. And in turn, it's never going to be perfect, and we've lost that natural ability. So thinking becomes this mere quantitative approach that only quantitative things like computers can account for. There's no sense of quality. There's nothing like that. If computers can only speak the language of calculation, which is to say the mental structure, but we speak the language of stories and magic, the magic and mythical structures. And we move our thinking, therefore our thinking will also be transformed into a more quantitative approach. And that in turn will tear it asunder and destroy it. Not good. Gonna write a Substack and do a video on that too. Prayer wheels, the fragmentation of myth, and computers are expressions of man who remains confined in his familiar consciousness frequency, while the necessary quote-unquote tide-turning, new consciousness mutation begins to superimpose itself over the exhausted consciousness structure. Each excess of quantification leads to powerlessness, vacuity, and helplessness. Wherever this is evident, it is an indication that the inadequate consciousness structure is already surpassed. In this light, the computers are a negative omen of the new consciousness structure and its strength. By the way, this was obviously written in 1949. So if Gebser is saying that this is a problem back then, I mean, obviously, computers have made humongous singularity qualitative leaps. So it's obviously only got worse. Now we got AI, we got ChatGPT, we got Claude, and all this crap. In the computers, the deficient mental world is surrendering itself and manifesting success in our task. And there can be no question that our task will be resolved, since it originates in necessity. The only open question is whether it will be resolved soon. If not, the solution would demand unthinkable sacrifices of those who are surrendering themselves. The number of those who will experience the solution depends on the temporal intensity of the emergent consciousness structure. If the task is not accomplished in time, it will lead to an almost complete self-surrender of mankind. This is the decisive twofold sense of our task. So not only do we have to complete the task, we have to do it at the right time. Because if we let this keep going, it's like cancer. If you let this go, it will become a bad thing. It's not good. So we have one more video left. I love you guys so much. You guys are the best. And also, fun surprise. I've been developing Gebser quizzes, and I think they're pretty good. They've got a lot of questions, so I'm still developing them. So after we're done the next video, I'll let you guys take those quizzes, and it'll be fun. I'm excited to see what answers you guys give. Some are multiple choice, some are long answer, some are more difficult, some are easier, and I'm very excited for you guys to try. So thank you guys again. We are so close. The light at the end of the tunnel is blinding us. I love you guys.